The day they buried my father, the sky wept without end. It was there, among the black umbrellas and somber granite, that I first saw him, the man my father had married. He stood in a tailored black suit that did little to hide the striking height of him, a stark silhouette against the weeping gray of the New England sky. He was everything I had ever been told an Omega should be, yet amplified to an unnerving degree. A vision of delicate features and porcelain stillness, like an orchid caught in a storm, beautiful and on the verge of shattering. When I was 15, my own biology had declared me an alpha, but a disappointingly weak one. The sight of my designation on the medical report had been enough for my father, Marcus Rhodes, to cast me out. I had often wondered if some essential part of me wasn't his, for him to be so cold. But now, watching this Omega, I felt a familiar possessiveness stir in my blood, a dark inheritance from the man now being lowered into the earth. I wanted to own him, too. I moved back into the Rhodes estate. With Marcus gone, there was no one left to object. The family lawyer, a man named Vance, presented me with a thick portfolio containing my father's last will and testament. He explained that Marcus had left his entire fortune to me. As his voice droned on about stocks and properties, my mind snagged on a single crucial implication. If I inherited everything that belonged to my father, then the beautiful man from the funeral now belonged to me. After showing the lawyer out, I turned and found him standing right behind me, silent as a wraith. Julian. That was his name. I resolved not to think of him as my stepfather. The title felt like a wall between us. He was so close I imagined I could detect his scent, something sharp and clean, like gin and winter air, laced with an undercurrent of something fiercely territorial. It was unlike any Omega's scent I had ever encountered, and it wasn't an alpha's either. My heart hammered against my ribs, a flush creeping up my neck. I fumbled for words, but he spoke first, his voice a low and resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. He introduced himself, his name Julian. I looked up, dazed, and had to crane my neck slightly. He was taller than me. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. Of course he was. I was an alpha so minor that even this Omega towered over me. The thought strangely eased some of my tension. I managed a shaky smile and gave him my name, Asher, telling him it was fine to just call me by my first name. I wondered if he'd find my directness rude. Instead, his gaze lingered on my face before he lifted a hand, his long, elegant fingers brushing against my cheek. A slow, surprised smile spread across his lips, like a cat discovering a fascinating new toy. He murmured something about how delicate my features were. Before I could process the compliment, or decide if it was one, his wrist flexed and his entire palm covered my nose and mouth. The world became the dark scent of his skin and the sudden, panicked lack of air. I felt suffocated, my hands instinctively grabbing at his wrist. Through the pressure, I heard his voice, muffled and close. He thought I was beautiful. The position was compromising, wrong on so many levels. Took all my strength to pull his hand away. I finally managed to choke out that he was beautiful, too. And he was. My own looks had often been a source of comment, a prettiness that many considered unbecoming of an alpha, but Julian's was something else entirely. It was a stark, arresting beauty that seemed to exist beyond the confines of gender. He thanked me, calling me Ash, his eyes curving into crescents as he asked if the nickname was all right. No one could have refused that smile. Taking my assent for granted, he took my hand, his grip surprisingly firm, and led me from the grand foyer, through a rain-dampened rose garden, and back toward the main living area. The gardeners and house staff we passed averted their eyes, their gazes skittering away from us. A palpable fear seemed to hang around Julian, a deference that was at odds with his gentle demeanor. I was pondering this strange dichotomy when his fingers tilted my chin up, forcing my attention back to him. He asked what I was thinking about. Without thinking, I confessed that I was thinking about him. His motion stilled. He asked if that was really true, his voice turning husky. I gave an honest nod. The next moment, a warm pressure met my cheek. He had leaned down and kissed me. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest, and he called me a good boy. Someone once wrote online that those two words were the dirtiest thing one person could say to another. At the time, I dismissed it. Now I understood. In an instant, my meager pheromones flared, spilling from my glands and wrapping around him like smoke, clinging to his limbs, his waist, his throat. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. I let a thought slip out, murmuring how wonderful it would be if he were my omega. His face hardened, the smile vanishing. He replied that one could only be an omega. I didn't understand his meaning then. He stared at me with an inscrutable expression before straightening up, his composure restored, as if the kiss had been a figment of my imagination. He reminded me, his voice cool and distant, that he was, after all, my father's omega, with a strange emphasis on the last word. At the time, all I heard was the connection to my father, a barrier between us. The warmth in my veins turned to ice. I watched him walk away into the cavernous living room, my fists clenching until my nails bit into my palms. In the suffocating silence, a humorless laugh escaped me. If he could be my father's, he could be mine. It was only much later that I learned he was never my father's at all, but in a way, he had always been mine. In the days that followed, he was perpetually busy. Though we lived in the same house, our paths rarely crossed. I would see his retreating back in the morning, always impeccably dressed in a suit, heading out before I was fully awake. The kiss felt like a dream I couldn't quite hold on to. I sensed, however, that even if he was an omega, he was the dominant force in our strange dynamic. I tried asking the staff about his business, but they were uniformly tight-lipped, their loyalty to him absolute. This aura of authority he carried, I suspected, was not something my father had bestowed upon him. It was entirely his own. My questions were answered one bright morning when I managed to rise early enough to catch him. We sat at opposite ends of the long dining table. I wished him a good morning, and he returned the sentiment without using my name. A strange anxiety coiled in my gut. A dull ache began to throb at the back of my neck, and my canines itched, the first signs of my rut. My susceptible period was arriving early. I quickly finished my breakfast. As he set down his coffee cup, I informed him that I would be staying elsewhere for a few days. As much as I wanted him, I wouldn't use my condition to take advantage of the situation. I would check into a hotel and return when I was in my right mind. Even though I suspected he wouldn't care either way, I felt compelled to report my plans. He paused, his back to me, silhouetted against the morning light. He repeated my words, his expression unreadable, confirming that I was leaving temporarily. I explained that he, being married, would understand. He said nothing, and I took his silence as agreement. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw his left hand twisting the diamond cufflink on his right wrist, torturing the metal as if it had wronged him. Just as I was about to comment on his wrinkled sleeve, he nodded, flashing the same breathtaking smile from our first meeting. He told me he understood. The sound of the front door closing behind him echoed through the hall. I noticed nothing amiss until I had packed a small suitcase and dragged it downstairs. The mansion was empty, utterly silent. The massive front door wouldn't budge. I jiggled the lock, confused. A chilling realization dawned on me as I pulled out my phone. No signal. I was trapped, isolated from the world. My rising panic fanned the flames of my impending rut. My senses sharpened, my teeth ached, and my glands burned with the need to bite, to claim, to release. I dragged my suitcase back upstairs, deciding to lock myself in my room until someone returned. The moment I pushed my bedroom door open and it swung shut behind me, a powerful force slammed me against the wall. The room was dark, the scream dying in my throat as a heavy body pressed me into the doorframe. During my rut, my reactions were usually sluggish, but I knew instantly who it was. A white-hot rage flared through me. I asked Julian what he was doing, that he could scare a person to death. It was obvious now that he had orchestrated this. The hot and cold treatment, the initial affection followed by distance, now this, he was playing with me. Fine. If he wanted to play, we could both play. My fingers slid up his back, 3 of them finding and pressing against his glands with mocking intimacy. I told him that if he wasn't going to speak, I would assume he wanted to be with me, and I promised to be gentle. Silence. Then a low, dark chuckle. Overwhelming, suffocating kisses followed, his body flush against mine, his arousal unmistakable. His lips moved against mine, trembling with something that felt like triumph. He dared me to come on, to see who was really marking whom. The challenge was so audacious I almost laughed. Him, an omega, mark me? The kiss moved to the back of my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. He urged me to bite him. I told him to stop talking nonsense, that my turn would come after his. In the next instant, a sharp, indescribable sting erupted from my glands. A pain so intense it felt like something was being ripped from my body. A cry of agony was trapped in my throat. I tried to tell him it was my turn, struggling to ignore the alien sensation. I fought to turn him to face the smooth, unmarked skin over his glands. Smooth, unmarked. My sluggish thoughts suddenly clicked into place. The realization that he had never been marked by my father sent a fresh wave of possessive fire through my veins. I lunged, canines bared, ready to bite down hard. But I couldn't. His hands were like steel, holding me back effortlessly as he lifted me. He whispered that he would handle the hard work. I woke the next day on time, a habit ingrained by my biological clock. My body ached, a deep soreness settled in my bones, and the glands on my neck throbbed with a sharp, alien pain. Then, the memories of the previous night crashed down on me. All the things that hadn't made sense. His height, his aggressive pheromones, the staff's fear. It all coalesced into a single ludicrous conclusion. I laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. Julian. My father had gone to such lengths to secure a wife, only to marry an alpha stronger than himself, perhaps stronger than any alpha. Shaking off the thoughts, I endured the pain and got dressed. The clothes were clean and fresh. He must have taken care of me. I opened the door and found a member of the household staff. I asked where Julian was. The man noted my strange, stiff posture and replied solemnly that Mr. Julian had left early and had instructed that I should rest well. Rest well. I ground my teeth. Limping toward the stairs, I stopped. On impulse, I turned and walked down the long corridor to the last room on the right. Julian's room. Sneaking into someone's private space was wrong, but I needed answers. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. His room was nothing like him. It was a stark landscape of black, white, and gray, minimalist to the point of being cold. I scanned the space, my eyes landing on the large, perfectly made bed in the center. Not a single wrinkle. Acting on a hunch, I slipped off my shoes, climbed onto the mattress, and lifted the pillow. Beneath it lay a folded t-shirt. My t-shirt, one I had misplaced weeks ago. He slept on this every night, inhaling the scent of his stepson. I held the fabric, which felt scalding in my hands, my mind uncontrollably picturing Julian using this to, what? Comfort himself? Did he think of me? The unsettling feeling of being watched, of being an object of obsession, sent a tremor through me, followed by a dark, inexplicable thrill. I folded the shirt carefully and placed it back, my face burning. Shaking myself from my daze, I remembered why I was there. I tried the nightstand. The first 2 drawers were locked. The third slid open so suddenly that its contents spilled onto the floor. Photos. Dozens of them. And they were all of me. I rarely took pictures. These were clearly candid shots, taken without my knowledge. Me walking in the rain, reading in the library, feeding a stray cat. Me in the throes of a susceptible period. In his lens, I wasn't a fringe alpha. I was the sole subject. It was a strange and powerful feeling, to be so completely seen, to be loved by the eye behind the camera. I took several deep breaths to quiet the frantic beating of my heart and began gathering the photos. A white document tucked beneath them caught my eye. A medical record. My heart began to pound with a premonition. Julian's face, younger but already beautiful, was on the first page. I skimmed the basic information, my eyes catching on the diagnosis. Pheromone mutation. Secondary gender identification result. Enigma. The description stated that enigmas have no susceptible or estrus periods, can control their pheromone output at will, and can actively mark or impregnate any individual of the 3 primary genders, alpha, beta, or omega. I read it 3 times. So Julian was neither A nor O, but something else entirely, something capable of marking an alpha. My confused thoughts were shattered by a knock at the door. I jumped, shoving the medical file behind my back, cursing myself for not locking the door. A tailor entered, holding a suit of fine, dark fabric. He informed me that Mr. Julian had called. I was to accompany him to a Mr. Hemlock's birthday party that evening. After he left, I changed into the suit. Fit perfectly, better than anything I owned. I took a picture on my phone and sent it to Julian. He replied instantly that it looked good. I texted back, asking how he had gotten my measurements so precisely. There was a long pause. When I looked at my phone again, his reply was there. He had measured me personally yesterday, and he thought my figure was great. I was speechless, my face flushing as I typed back that I didn't like that. He replied immediately that he was wrong, baby. A minute later, another text arrived. He couldn't take it back, followed by a smiling emoji. Shameless. Knowing his true nature shifted my perception of him. The beautiful, noble figure was shattered, replaced by the man who kept my photo and my clothes, who kissed me with a searing passion. He was strong, paranoid, a dark ghost who had been watching me all along. And I liked it. Being spied on, possessed, treated as a prize. His secret, frantic love was an addiction, a feeling of being held so tightly there was no room for anything else. I arrived at the party and saw Julian by the entrance, resplendent in a white suit that made him seem even taller. I, in my black suit, felt a tremor of something possessive as we stood together, a perfect monochrome pair. I greeted him with a teasing "Evening, mother." I knew his marriage to my father had been a sham. He nodded, his expression cool, but his eyes raked over me, lingering on my waist before he started fiddling with those familiar cufflinks. He told me to go, then leaned close and added, "Baby." I suggested he could call me mother, and I'd call him baby. He was taller, so holding his arm was awkward. I adjusted our position, linking my arm through his instead. A flicker of a smile crossed his lips. Our entrance turned heads. I slipped away from the dance floor while Julian was cornered by an elegant, older man and helped myself to cake. As I started on a second piece, I overheard a conversation from a nearby corner. The sneering voices belonged to 2 alphas. They commented on the worthless Rhodes alpha hooking up with his own father's omega, wondering aloud what he was like in bed and how Marcus Rhodes must be spinning in his grave. One of them joked about conquering Julian himself. I nearly choked. Had they any idea? The thought was so amusing I had to suppress a laugh. I looked up and saw a man watching me with an interested expression. It was Vance, the lawyer. He approached, his demeanor more playboy than professional, and asked if I wanted to know how he knew. Before I could ask what he meant, he leaned in close, the woody scent of his cologne filling the air. He straightened up and told me that I smelled like Julian. He then gestured to the back of my neck, pointing out the visible teeth marks. I had forgotten to cover them. I mumbled that you couldn't really tell. He gave me a meaningful look and then asked if I trusted Julian. I was cautious, but I replied that of course I did, that Julian was one of us, one of the Rhodes family. He was mine. Vance smirked and challenged me to ask Julian if he considered himself a Rhodes. He then got serious, mentioning Ethelred Biopharma. I knew of it. It was the source of the Rhodes family fortune. He asked if I knew who the largest shareholder was now. A cold guess formed in my stomach. He saw it on my face and pressed on, asking if I could guess how Julian kicked my father out and took over. I grew impatient, telling him I didn't care who owned the company. If Julian was capable enough to run it, that was his business. My first reaction was surprise, finally understanding what Julian had been busy with. I told Vance he was wasting his time trying to drive a wedge between us. Then a wicked idea struck me. I leaned in close and whispered that I wished Julian would steal the company, that his things were mine. I confessed I loved him so much that it didn't matter. Vance looked genuinely taken aback for a moment, then laughed. He said my father had described me as a naive little rabbit, but I clearly knew more than I let on. As I turned to leave, he quickly slipped something into my pocket. It was a USB drive. He put a finger to his lips and told me it was good stuff, everything I wanted to know. On the ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about the drive. As soon as we arrived, I rushed to my room, locked the door, and plugged it into my computer. It contained a compressed file with countless photos and videos. The first file was Julian's federal information. Marital status: unmarried. A small, private smile touched my lips. Then I opened the second image. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. It was a photo of Julian, lying on a metal frame bed in what looked like a sterile lab. The glands on his neck were a bloody, mangled mess. Beside him stood my father, Marcus Rhodes, holding a scalpel and grinning at the camera like a demon. A knock at the door made me jump. I had forgotten to close the laptop. Julian was standing there in soft home clothes, looking like a prince, a stark contrast to the mangled image on the screen. I scrambled to shut the computer, tripping on the rug. A strong arm caught me. "Careful," he murmured softly, seemingly oblivious to the screen. Then, his voice quiet, he said, "You saw." I stood there, helpless, before a wave of anguish washed over me. I stood on my toes and wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, my fingers gently tracing the healed skin over his glands. I asked if it still hurt. He was silent for a long time, his body trembling slightly. The arm around my waist tightened until I felt I might fuse with him. He finally answered that it used to hurt a lot, but not anymore. The simple statement broke something inside me, and tears streamed down my face. He held me, the one who had been hurt, comforting me, telling me not to cry. He had paid Marcus back, he said, 10 times, 100 times over. He watched me, a flicker of fear in his eyes, as if afraid I might condemn him. I wiped my tears and kissed him. I leaned close to his ear and whispered that he did a great job, that he did what I had wanted to do for a long time but never could. His body went rigid with surprise, then relaxed into the embrace, his pheromones a cloud of possessive victory around me. In his fragmented narrative, I learned the truth. I learned how Marcus had used Ethelred Biopharma as a front for gruesome human experiments, obsessed with gland evolution and creating a power greater than a high-level alpha. I learned how Julian and Vance had escaped the lab and worked to bring him down. He explained that Marcus, in his madness, had accepted a fake enigma gland, one Julian had fabricated, and had it implanted, leading to his own painful, pathetic death. I walked to my suitcase and pulled out another USB drive. It contained footage I had taken when I was 15, the day after my designation, of Marcus and his men dragging bloodied people away. I had sent a copy to the authorities then, but nothing ever came of it. I had thought it was just murder. I never imagined the depths of his insanity. Julian took the drive, pulling me onto his lap. He warned me not to think any of it was my fault, his tone leaving no room for argument. I deflected, changing the subject, asking him to explain the photos of me and my shirt under his pillow. He went still, then buried his face in the crook of my neck like a guilty dog. He admitted I'd seen it all. Then he began peppering my neck with soft kisses. He told me he was a bad person, worse than I thought. He explained that when he first began investigating Marcus, he hit a wall. Then he found out about the son Marcus had disowned. He had started following me, photographing me, seeing me as a potential weak point, a key. He photographed me going to school, feeding strays, running foolishly through the rain without an umbrella. He had planned to use me, but somewhere along the way the tool became the obsession. He hadn't been able to stop watching,